The Buddhist truth. Why nice people suffer most. Have you ever asked yourself why, in a world that seems to praise kindness, empathy, and compassion, it's often the kindest people who struggle the most? Why do the ones who give the most hurt the deepest? Why do the people who would never harm others often find themselves harmed by the world? This video is not just about suffering, it's about the hidden laws of reality that many of us never question. And to understand these laws, we need to go deep into one of the most misunderstood yet profoundly insightful teachings in history, Buddhism. Not the pop culture version of Buddhism that simply tells you to let go or be present, but the raw, unfiltered truth that reveals why suffering exists and, more importantly, why it haunts the kindest souls. Let's begin with a single, uncomfortable idea. You suffer more because you care more. That's the paradox. The nicer you are, the more you open your heart to the world. But in doing so, you also open the door to pain. Think about it. When you're kind, you take on not just your own burdens, but the burdens of others. You feel their pain, their disappointments, their fears. You make room for their emotions in your already full heart. And yet, isn't this what makes us human? Isn't this what we admire in others? So then why does life seem to punish those who embody this? Buddhism doesn't shy away from this question. In fact, it leans into it. The first noble truth is simple and brutal. Life is suffering. And at first glance, it feels like a pessimistic way to view the world. But it's not. It's a mirror. It's an invitation to look at life as it really is, not as we want it to be. Because only when we see clearly can we begin to live truthfully. Buddhism doesn't say suffering is evil. It doesn't say suffering is wrong. It says that suffering is inevitable, especially when we're deeply attached. And this is where nice people fall into the trap. You see, nice people are often attached to outcomes. They want to help, and they want that help to matter. They love deeply, and they want that love to be reciprocated. They forgive, and they want that forgiveness to heal. But the world doesn't always return what we give. And that's where the pain begins. Because when your self-worth is tied to outcomes you can't control, you become vulnerable not just to disappointment, but to existential despair.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
Now, let me ask you something that might shake you. Is it possible that your kindness is, in part, a form of control? That your goodness is not just a gift to the world, but also a subtle attempt to create a world that won't hurt you? We rarely think of kindness this way. But if we're honest, many of us are kind not just because we want to be, but because we don't want to be hurt. We think that if we're good enough, the world will spare us. That if we love enough, people won't leave. That if we give enough, we won't feel empty. But Buddhism teaches something radically different. No matter how kind you are, the world owes you nothing. And that's not a cruel idea. In fact, it's liberating. Because once you realize that suffering isn't a punishment for being good, you stop trying to earn your way out of it. You stop believing that pain is a sign you've failed. And instead, you begin to see it as part of the human experience. You begin to ask better questions, not why is this happening to me? But what is this teaching me? Not how do I stop suffering, but how do I suffer wisely? There's a deep Buddhist concept called dukkha, the dissatisfaction that arises when life doesn't meet our expectations. And the ironic thing is, the nicer you are, the more expectations you often carry. You expect people to be grateful, You expect fairness. You expect reciprocity. And when those expectations aren't met, you feel betrayed not just by others, but by life itself. But what if the problem isn't that life is unfair? What if the problem is that we assumed it ever would be? Here's a mind-bending thought. What if your suffering is not a sign of your weakness, but of your depth? What if it means that you are tuned in to something most people ignore? Pain is not the enemy. Pain is the evidence that you care, that you feel, that you live in truth, not illusion. But the challenge is not to avoid pain, it's to learn how to carry it without letting it crush you. So how do we do that? How do we live with an open heart in a world that often breaks it? That's what I want to explore with you next. Because the answer is not to stop being kind. The answer is to stop being attached to what kindness gives you in return. And that's a kind of freedom no one can take from you. The trap of attachment, how compassion becomes a cage. Let's go deeper. We've established that nice people suffer more not because kindness is a flaw, but because kindness often walks hand in hand with attachment. And here's where it gets dangerous when your compassion turns into a cage. You start believing that your love, your patience, your forgiveness should protect you from harm. But Buddhism teaches something startling. Attachment masquerades as love, but it's rooted in fear. And what we fear most is the unpredictability of life, the randomness of suffering, the idea that no matter how good we are, we cannot control what happens next. Attachment is subtle. It's not just about clinging to people or possessions, it's about clinging to an identity, or the identity of the good person, the one who always shows up, and the one who always forgives, the one who puts others first. But here's the catch: when that identity becomes rigid, it stops being virtuous and starts becoming a prison. You start sacrificing your own needs, your own voice, your own boundaries, not because it's right, but because it's who you think you have to be. And when life doesn't reward that sacrifice, the disillusionment cuts deeper than any betrayal. Let me ask you something that might sting. Are you kind because you are free, or are you kind because you are afraid? Afraid of rejection, afraid of being seen as selfish, afraid of facing the chaos that comes when you stop people-pleasing and start living authentically. Buddhism doesn't tell us to stop caring, it tells us to let go of the idea that our care should come with guarantees. That's the essence of non-attachment. It's not cold indifference. It's radical clarity. It's the ability to love without needing to possess, to give without needing to receive, to help without needing to fix. And yet, so many of us struggle with this balance. We confuse compassion with obligation. We think being nice means being endlessly available. We think being loving means never saying no. But in reality, true compassion includes yourself. And when you abandon yourself for others, you're not being kind, you're being attached. You're hoping that by giving more, you'll finally be worthy. But worthiness doesn't come from sacrifice, it comes from presence, from knowing that you are enough, even when you stop performing. Buddhism teaches that all suffering arises from tanha, craving, thirst, the desperate desire for things to be other than they are. And one of the most dangerous cravings is the craving for emotional safety through control. We think that if we're kind enough, we can control how people treat us. We think that if we're good enough, life won't hurt us. But life doesn't work that way. The Buddha himself was the embodiment of compassion, and yet he was betrayed, misunderstood, and faced immense suffering. So if even he wasn't spared, why do we think we should be? Pause for a moment and reflect. What are you clinging to right now that's causing you pain? Is it a relationship where your kindness is being exploited? Is it a belief that you must always be strong for others? Is it the idea that suffering means you've done something wrong? Whatever it is, ask yourself, is your compassion liberating you or chaining you? Is it rooted in love or in fear? The most beautiful and terrifying truth in Buddhism is this: everything is impermanent. People change. Circumstances shift. Emotions rise and fall like waves. And when we attach our identity to things that are constantly moving, we suffer. But when we learn to observe without clinging, to love without grasping, to act from our heart without expecting a reward, we begin to taste something extraordinary: freedom. That's the paradox. The more you try to hold on, the more you suffer. But the moment you let go, not in bitterness, not in apathy, but in serenity, you find peace. You realize you were never meant to control life. You were meant to flow with it. And in that flow, your compassion becomes powerful. Not because it changes others, but because it no longer controls you. And so here's the challenge I leave you with. Can you love without needing anything in return? Can you be kind even when the world doesn't notice? Can you give without becoming empty? These are not easy questions, but they are the questions that free us. When goodness hurts, the silent burden of empaths in a loud world, let's shine a light on a group of people who carry more pain than they often reveal: the empaths, the quiet listeners, the emotional sponges, the ones who feel everything, sometimes too much. If you've ever walked into a room and absorbed the tension like it was your own, or if someone else's sadness hits you like a storm you didn't see coming, you're not just kind, you're empathic. But here's the hidden truth: empaths are the most vulnerable to suffering because they live wide open in a world that rarely protects what is soft. Empaths don't just observe pain, they internalize it. They don't just see suffering, they carry it. And while this can be a beautiful gift, a superpower, even it often becomes a silent burden. Because while the world celebrates strength, confidence, and boldness, it rarely makes space for the quiet sensitivity of those who feel deeply. In fact, society often mistakes gentleness for weakness. But what's more courageous than continuing to feel in a world that constantly asks you to numb out? Buddhism recognizes this depth of feeling. In the concept of karuna, or compassion, there is an understanding that true empathy is not just emotional, it's existential. When you see someone suffer and feel a deep longing to alleviate that suffering, you're not just reacting, you're connecting to the universal truth of dukkha. You're remembering that no one escapes pain. Not you, not them, not even the Buddha. And yet, instead of turning away, you lean in. That is empathy at its highest form. But here's the twist: if you don't learn to hold that empathy with wisdom, it will consume you. Empaths often confuse boundaries with selfishness. They feel guilty for saying no. They worry that protecting their energy is somehow a betrayal of their kindness. But this is where the suffering multiplies. Because when you constantly override your own needs, you don't just burn out, you become resentful. And that resentment is the shadow side of compassion. It's what happens when you give from an empty well and expect your soul to stay hydrated. Let me ask you this: who takes care of you when you're busy taking care of everyone else? Who holds space for your pain when you're the one everyone turns to? This is the silent suffering of the empath. They appear calm, present, grounded. But inside, they're often carrying decades of unspoken grief, unresolved trauma, and emotional exhaustion from holding others up while neglecting themselves. And yet, they rarely ask for help, because part of their identity has been built around being the strong one, the healer, the giver, the one who doesn't break. But here's the revolutionary Buddhist insight. You are not your role. You are not your empathy, your kindness, your usefulness. You are awareness. You are the witness. And the moment you identify too deeply with being the nice one, you've already lost your center. Because now you're performing kindness, not embodying it. You're trapped in a role, not rooted in truth. And that's when suffering creeps in, not because you feel too much, but because you've forgotten that your feelings too deserve space. Empathy without mindfulness is a fire without a container. It spreads until it burns everything, including you. But empathy with awareness, that's transformative. That's when your compassion becomes clear and kind, fierce even. Because now you're no longer trying to save everyone, you're simply showing up fully without losing yourself. You're not fixing people, you're witnessing their truth. And in that witnessing, something sacred happens, healing, not because you take their pain, but because you let them feel seen without judgment. So ask yourself, are you carrying a weight that was never yours to hold? Are you mistaking your value for your usefulness? Are you running on empty and still trying to pour into others? If so, pause, breathe, and remember your goodness is not measured by how much you suffer for others. It's measured by how well you honor your own soul while still offering compassion to the world. The final liberation, how detaching can make you even kinder. Here's the part that might seem like a contradiction, maybe even a betrayal of everything you've believed about kindness. But stay with me, because this could change the way you live, love, and give forever. The key to becoming truly compassionate is detachment. Not detachment in the cold, distant, emotionless sense. Not the kind that shuts people out or builds walls. Real detachment, as Buddhism teaches, is an act of deep wisdom and even deeper love. It's the understanding that you can care fully and fiercely without clinging, that you can give everything from your heart and still let go of how it's received. This is the final liberation. And it's not about giving less, it's about giving cleanly, without strings, without expectation, without the toxic residue of needing your kindness to be seen, appreciated, or returned. Because when you're attached to the outcome of your goodness is conditional. It becomes transactional. It says, I'll be kind, but only if it works. But detachment says, I'll be kind because that's who I am, even if it doesn't fix anything, even if no one notices, even if it breaks my heart. And that kind of kindness is unstoppable. Buddhism calls this upekkha equanimity. But it's the final of the four immeasurables, the pinnacle of spiritual maturity. Compassion, love, and joy are beautiful, but without equanimity, they become unstable. You will rise and fall with the moods of others, with the chaos of life, with the pain of attachment. But when you root yourself in equanimity, you become a mountain. The winds of praise or criticism, gratitude or betrayal no longer shake you. And from that grounded place, your kindness becomes even more powerful, because now it's not about you anymore. It's not about protecting your identity as the good person. It's about truth. It's about alignment. It's about service without self-erasure. Imagine what your life would look like if you could love people without needing them to change. If you could help others without needing to be thanked. If you could be kind even to those who don't deserve it, not because they're right, but because you're free. That's what detachment offers you. Not numbness, but clarity. Not apathy, but inner peace. Now, here's the twist that surprises most people. When you detach from needing kindness to serve you, your kindness becomes more effective. Because it's not tangled in ego. It's not laced with resentment. It's not secretly manipulative or desperate for validation. It's clean, and people feel that. They may not be able to explain it, but they feel the difference between kindness given freely and kindness given with a hidden price tag. And whether they respond or not, that kind of love leaves a mark. It ripples through the world in ways you may never see. So I ask you now, what would happen if you detached from the outcome of your goodness? Who would you be if you stopped performing kindness and started embodying it? What kind of peace could you taste if you stopped needing the world to reward your soul? Nice people suffer most not because they are weak, but because they are deeply alive in a world that doesn't often know what to do with that aliveness. But suffering is not the end of the story. When you wake up to the truth of non-attachment, when you stop clinging and start flowing, that when you let go of needing your goodness to protect you, you become dangerous in the best way. You're untouchable, unshakable, unstoppable. You become the kind of kind that heals not just others, but yourself. And that is the Buddhist truth. If this resonated with you, take a moment to reflect on how you've been offering your compassion. Is it coming from freedom or from fear? The answer might just set you free.